views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individual participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of their institutions, employers, or affiliates. This content is for informational and discussion purposes only and should not be taken as official policy, guidance, or advice. Hello, welcome everyone to episode 5 of our podcast, AI on the Quad. We are here to talk with thought leaders and trailblazers about how AI is impacting and transforming education. I'm your host, Phil Spitzy.
And I'm your co-host, Andy Tynes, and we are excited to welcome Janae Robert to the podcast. Janae, for the audience who may not know you, could you maybe give us a little bit of an overview, background on your current role and what that entails?
Sure. Thanks for having me on the pod. Excited to chat with you today. So I am Janae Robert. I'm a senior researcher at EDUCAUSE. I've been with EDUCAUSE, a little over 4 years now, maybe inching up on 4.5. And one of the best things about working at EDUCAUSE is I get to study all the things happening in higher ed technology. Of course, recently that has been almost completely overtaken by AI, which is why we're chatting today. So some of the types of things I work on at EDUCAUSE, we have some AI landscape studies. I've done a couple of shorter projects. We have these short surveys we call quick polls at EDUCAUSE, and I've done a couple of those related to AI and other topics. And I'm sure we'll touch on this today too, our Horizon reports and Horizon action plans. And these are really helpful reports. They're qualitative research, and they look at the future or potential futures of higher education. And so that's, of course, very relevant today with AI topics.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us. Before we jump into the research, let's take just a second because maybe not everybody knows the definition of qualitative research.
Sure.
So give us that definition to get us going.
Sure. So when you think about two main categories of research, qualitative and quantitative. The qualitative is usually research that answers questions like why or how. They're things that can't necessarily be answered with clean numbers. So, for example, if you want to ask the question, how are people using AI tools to support student engagement? The answer to that is not going to be necessarily 43% of faculty use AI tools for X, Y, and Z purposes. What's much more helpful is a more robust description of the things that people are doing, how it's working out, why they're doing the things they're doing, what are the risks, what are the opportunities, and so forth. So think of it as words. And the quantitative research is quantity, so things that can be measured a little bit more neatly with numbers. So what percent of respondents say that their privacy and security policies are adequate to address AI-related concerns? That is a number that we can and do provide with our research. So that's the basic difference.
Perfect. No, that's helpful, and I think just gets us in the right frame of mind. So if we start off with some research, which was the 2025 EDUCAUSE Horizon Action Plan titled Building Skills and Literacy for Teaching with Generative AI. I think you have a quote in there that says, nobody can predict the future, but we can plan for the future. Mm-hmm. So what does that mean from the standpoint of kind of a strategic planning perspective in the higher ed space? How does an institution move toward that position of being AI ready?
Yeah, I love that you start with this question. It's a lot of the research we do at EDUCAUSE is very forward looking, and the Horizon reports are a big part of that. I can't tell you how many times people have approached me at a conference and said, "Have you ever gone back and looked at the accuracy of the Horizon reports for predicting the future?" And I love getting that question because I always say that's not the purpose of the Horizon reports. Nobody can predict the future. And if you find someone who can, please send them my way because I need some investment portfolio advice.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
but the purpose of our research and what we hope we can empower our members to do is to use data about current real world circumstances to then think about potential ways current trends or current interesting phenomena could manifest down the road. 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is that you're looking at. And from there, so we collect all this data about current events. We think about what might this look like in the future, and then we really emphasize the importance of moving beyond just what could that look like, but what do we want the future to look like? And that's where I think the real magic of this type of thinking and really directly to your question about how institutions move into this practice, this is where the magic happens. So in our action plan specifically, we bring together experts from the higher education community and we ask them to together craft this picture of the ideal future in some topic. Now, we're not naive enough to think we'll be able to always hit that like a bullseye. But what I like to say is that if we're aiming at nothing, we'll hit nothing. So we might as well be aiming for this ideal vision of the future. And then it doesn't stop there because just because we know where we're going, that doesn't mean we know how to get there. And the action plans, as you may guess in the name, provide then from our panel of experts some really concrete actions people can take. And in the last couple of years, they've been broken down really nicely into actions an individual contributor can take, actions that can be taken by someone who's heading up a department or unit, actions that can be taken by cross-unit collaboration. So you might think of that as institution-wide in many cases. And then also even thinking really big picture to how institutions can work together to achieve that preferred future. And we did that because we really wanted to empower the community. No matter who is reading that report, no matter where you sit at the institution, you can think about your preferred future and think about actions you can take to get there.
I think that actually makes really, really good sense because typically change, whatever that change is going to occur at multiple levels, right? And by giving them, each kind of individual at whatever level they're at, um, giving them some guidance or some ideas or some frameworks on how to move forward. I think that's huge. That sounds really good. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's go on to the second topic, assessments. Assessments in the age of Gen AI are a pretty hot topic right now, not surprisingly. What's the research telling you about how institutions and faculty will need to adjust in this new age of AI?
Yeah, this is definitely a big hot topic. In the action plan that we were just talking about, it was brought up by our panelists that they would, in this ideal future, like to see that assessment itself has really been transformed by the appearance of AI. I think early on, when generative AI was making a big splash a couple of years ago, for some of us, that first reaction was, "Oh my gosh, academic integrity is going to be destroyed." And there were a lot of protective mechanisms people started to try to put in place around that existing model of academic integrity and the existing model of assessment. And what we're seeing now is a bit of a shift away from how do we prevent students from cheating towards how do we design assessments that are more meaningful, that really get at the things we want students to learn. And I don't want to say AI proof, but how do we understand what assessment looks like when AI is around? Because the truth of the matter is that in most assessment settings, particularly in formative assessments, we're seeing that it's nearly impossible to eliminate AI from that equation. So one resource I like to point people to is the University of Sydney. They've done some really interesting work in assessment in the age of AI. They have something called a two-lane assessment model. So two lane as in number two, and lanes like how you drive your car in a lane. And the idea is that some assessments can be done with nearly 100% certainty that students will not have access to AI tools. Maybe they're sitting in front of you having a conversation, and this is one lane of assessment. And the other lane of assessment is everything else, and you have to assume that AI tools will be present for those assessments. And so, thinking really creatively about the different types of environments our students are engaging with our assessments under really helps faculty to be more planful and develop those assessments according to, let's say, more meaningful standards, what they really hope students are able to learn and demonstrate and be able to do from their courses.
Yeah, that actually resonates with. I recently went through one of the EDUCAUSE courses, which was teaching with AI. That was led by a previous guest of ours, Dr. Lane Freeman. Really fantastic. But there was one quote that I took from that class that I'll just share here, and it really hit upon this notion, which is um, cheating is not a moral failing, but rather evidence that a student was motivated more by the grade than by the learning goals of the course. So if we reframe the issues of cheating to a problem of motivation, now you've got additional strategies, pathways, lanes, like that you just said, to kind of figure out a better way to deliver the content and then assess that,
Yeah.
that the learning basically of the content.
Yeah, it's so important to think of this as not a student level issue, but an institution level issue or an industry level issue for all of higher education to consider. So many times when we have big challenges in higher ed, we want to pinpoint, okay, what is the student behavior that's problematic for this big challenge? But really, particularly when it comes to assessment, this is not about individual student behavior. This is about the way that our systems are set up. So my PhD is in curriculum and instruction. We spent a lot of time when I was a graduate student and a postdoc investigating what are the more meaningful ways that we need to be assessing students? What do we really want them to be able to know and do coming out of our institutions? And can we design assessments that do get at those things rather than assessments that make sense for just the situational limitations we have? How do we break past those limitations? Can we work at a higher level? And so early on, when AI was driving some of these conversations about academic misconduct, I was really hopeful, and I'm really happy to see that the shift has happened. I was hopeful at that time that we would shift to this place of saying, let this be a moment for us to really question the way that we do things. I'm excited to see where it goes. I don't have all the answers yet. I don't think anyone does. I will tease to some extent that this may be a topic of deeper investigation in an upcoming research project that I'll be working on early in 2026. So stay tuned. And we might have another research study coming out that just focuses on this question.
Awesome. That'll be fantastic. Yeah, we will highlight whatever that might be when the time comes. Um, that all sounds really, really good. I think it's one of probably the struggles that a lot of educators are thinking about and probably feel personally, challenged to solve is how do I assess that they've learned what they've learned, right?
Right.
And even thinking about in the K through 12 space of the standardized testing, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Um, and some of that folds over into higher ed with different certifications, right? Nursing, law, even in the tech space. I've had to do certifications on different technologies throughout my career. Um, So I think it all can be shaped around that kind of student motivation again,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Figuring it may not necessarily be changing the assessment, but hopefully changing their motivation. You know,
Mhm.
this is why you should feel that this is important to learn. And not that it's
Mhm.
just going to be part of the, the certification exam, but this is where it's now applicable. And I think Gen AI is great at doing that.
Mhm.
One of the questions that plagued me through all of my, not all, but most of my classes in school was, why do I have to learn this? I'm
Mhm.
going to be a blank when I grow up. Where am I ever going to use this again? And I've posed that question a number of times to ChatGPT and Gemini just to see what it says. And it gives really, really good real world examples of, if you're going to be, an airline pilot, this is why, whatever topic is important. And I think that's a great way of getting that motivation shift to occur for students.
Yeah, I love that you touch on that. It's such a complicated topic. It's so, you're right. It's not just about designing better assessments. It's about getting at motivation. It's about also thinking really critically about what barriers have we put in place for students that just don't need to be there. It's not a story that I tell that often, but that question is really what inspired me to get into the line of work that I'm in the first place. I looked around and I saw that our students were showing up to our institutions excited and wanting to be whatever that is, fill in the blank. And they had been selected by our admissions processes, so they were presumably qualified to be there. And yet, there were a number of things getting in the way of their success that were set up at an institutional level. And so, again, I hope that this moment in AI gives us a chance to pause and reflect and challenge our assumptions and our practices and think about what we could be doing better.
Well, and we've been through this before, right? I mean, when Google first came about, right? It was
Hmm.
the same questions were being asked. And, I think at the end of the day, for any student, you can leverage AI in a very positive way to help you learn more, learn faster, or you can be on the opposite end. You don't really care at all. You're just trying to graduate and you're not that interested in learning. You're just want the degree and you use it to get through and you don't really learn a lot. So at the end of the day, it comes down to that student, and I'm not sure it's possible to put guardrails in place that are going to affect each type of student in the way we want to.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why I often say to people, I will never stand up on a stage and tell a room, you should be teaching with AI. That's silly. It depends on what you're teaching and what level the students are and all sorts of things. But I will stand up on a stage and say, you should be teaching students about AI and helping them gain those skills to critically evaluate what these tools are. Are they appropriate for the things they want to use them for or not? That is our job as educators. So it's an important distinction to make because I think sometimes the types of conversations we're having here come across as a bit like techno-utopian or or like insisting that people adopt these tools. But what we're really insisting, I think, and tell me if you disagree, but I really think that what we're really trying to put forward is it's our responsibility to teach students about this technology and be able to evaluate it critically.
I think that's a great
Yeah.
point.
Yep. Yeah. I'm on board with that for sure. Yep.
So,
Um, Digging into the kind of your body of research, not any one specific item. Um, have you put your finger on any kind of concrete ways that institutions can anticipate or respond to the shifting expectations by their students? Moving to more of a proactive model versus a reactive model, I guess.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. so much of our research sits at that national or international level. We're looking across institutions, right? And I think in this case, it's really important to acknowledge that the needs and expectations of your students will differ greatly by institution, and even within institutions, different departments, different programs. And so, what this really does for me as a researcher is it gives me an opportunity to talk about the importance of collecting that local research. You can use a lot of the instruments that we use at EDUCAUSE. And if you read an EDUCAUSE report and you don't see that there's an actual survey instrument attached to it, email me, email one of us on the team, email whoever authored the report, and we're always happy to share those instruments. So it's incredibly important because if you go Google right now, do students use AI for school? You will find 10 different studies with 10 different responses. Well, more than 10, but to make my point, you'll find studies that say 90 something percent of students are using AI tools for school. You'll find studies more like ours, it's a bit lower than that number in EDUCAUSE research. You'll find studies that talk about students excited to adopt AI tools. You'll find studies that talk about students who dislike AI tools and don't want to see them used in their schools. So some of this comes down to the different ways that we conduct that research, and we could go down the super nerdy rabbit hole of methodology and methodological differences. Probably not, but really at the heart of it, all student groups are quite different. I mean, all individual students, but all groups of students are quite different. So survey your students, have listening tours, create a student AI advisory group. There are a number of institutions who have done this. I think I've heard from places like Penn State, some other institutions that are really working to bring their students together to help advise where they go with AI tools. Yeah, and that helps in a number of levels. First, it means that the institutional strategy is informed by that student voice. But then there's also an element of buy-in when it comes to executing that strategy. And so when there's student voice represented, that is helpful for all sorts of stakeholders at the institution, faculty, staff, board of trustees. When you hear from those students, it's just so important.
Perfect.
So next topic, going to skip forward a bit, looking just a little more near term. Janae, what does the AI landscape in education look like in the next 12 to 24 months? 24 months, I realize, is in something like AI is pretty far out.
Yeah. So one of the things I do to try to stay up to date with, because everyone knows this is one of the hardest topics to stay on top of, right? There are a number of small like forums or little gatherings, people talking about what they're doing with AI tools. I just came back. Let's see, it's just a couple weeks ago. I went to the Notre Dame AI Forum. University of Florida has one coming up, I think, in the winter. But I mean, throw a rock, you'll hit a university that's having an AI forum, including EDUCAUSE, which will be having one in the summer. And what I'm hearing a lot of now that is different from a year ago, much more specific use cases for AI tools. So people identifying a very specific challenge that they have in their institutional processes. And this is really important, by the way, to start with this is our pain point. This is a thing we need to fix. Not starting with this would be a cool tool to create. But really starting from that strategic positioning of this is a problem that we haven't quite been able to solve this yet with other technology, with putting people in a room, with getting dozens of faculty together on various groups and designing generative AI tools intended to solve that problem. So I'm seeing a lot of that, a lot of these very specific use cases, and I think that that will just continue, not only in higher education, but I suspect that in the world, this is the direction that we'll see generative AI tools heading. And I personally can't wait until you have like your generative AI cookbook that is super accurate and easy to interact with. Um, and then beyond that, a lot of conversation. I've been saying I've heard more about return on investment in the last 3 months than I have in the last 3 years. So, uh, and let me explain why I think that is. So, early on in the research we did about generative AI in higher ed, we asked people how they are funding, whether it's pilots or purchasing new tools. How are these things being funded? Early on, they were being funded with flexible budget line items, so carryover funds, innovation funds, little pockets of money that I'll have a conversation with the CIO and say, "How are you funding that?" He said, "Well, it's that money that I make appear when there's no money anywhere else." So, uh, but that can only carry you for so far, right? 1, 2, 3 years maybe. So we're getting into that time frame now where people have to start shifting out of that flexible budget line item mode and really think seriously about what are those long-term budgetary sources for funding some of these things. And some of these tools are not inexpensive. Some of them are being integrated into tools we already have. But for things that people are trying to adopt that are new, there's now this need to justify where that funding comes from. Um, and it's not easy. And I think that's where the really interesting developments over the next 12, 24 months, the big question marks that I have. Will there be institutions who are able to do this in a holistic way? It's quite simple when it's a tool. Say you have a tool that's meant to expedite processing some specific type of a form. That's easy to evaluate. Number of hours we spent before, number of hours we spend now, cost of tool, it's math. But some of these things, increasing student engagement, increasing employee satisfaction with their jobs, these are really important outcomes, but very difficult to measure. And sometimes pretty much impossible to measure in terms of the impact of just one tool on that outcome that we're interested in. So remains to be seen where people go with this, but what I can say with near certainty is it'll be a hot topic in the next year or so.
You mentioned you're seeing a lot of forums out there, and I'm sure there, as you just described, various topics out there. But I would also bet you're seeing a lot of the same topics at each of these forums. Are there any topics that you see kind of consistently at each of these forums?
There is a lot of interest in people being able to just share specific use cases. How are you doing it? So if you think back to 2, 3 years ago, uh, a lot of conversations, a lot of sessions, workshops, online courses that were at a very high level. So, what are the frameworks for AI literacies? What does it mean to use AI ethically? Just these very high level questions. And within the last year, I would say there's been a significant shift, and this is reflected in my research as well, away from those very high level strategic questions, policy questions, down into the nitty gritty, I would say, of who needs to be involved in designing these products? How do we, what are the specific functions that these tools can accomplish? And I'm even seeing more and more mixtures of you'll have a presentation of somebody who's speaking about the purpose and form and function of a tool right alongside with somebody who has been developing that tool, writing the code for the tool, training the algorithms. It's something that I hadn't seen before generative AI all that often. You very rarely would previously see somebody developing software along with somebody using the software. But now, because those two things are so intimately integrated, we're having more of those conversations, and I think that's really interesting.
Very much
That
so.
answers a question that I was going to ask is how much are you seeing build versus buy?
Yeah, yeah, this is a tough question, and I think the jury is out still on where we'll land in general. Um, Remember that when I go to a forum, for example, you're talking about probably a lot of schools that have the resources needed to build. And so there's going to be a bit of a bias in those environments. But when I'm not at those specific places, when I'm just I don't know, engaging with people on a listserv or, at an online conference, something like that. You're definitely seeing people kind of wrestling with that question of we want this specific tool that has a specific function, but we don't really have the resources. We don't have the expertise or the time or the money to put into developing that. And so how do we move forward there? And that's one of the things that we talk a lot about at EDUCAUSE because something we're really good at EDUCAUSE is connecting people across silos and supporting that community. And so that's where we tell people to jump into that. We have a community group. So if you're not familiar with them, they're kind of like special interest groups, basically. So we have a community group focused on AI. We obviously have a lot of conferences and those types of events. And you mentioned taking the Teaching with AI Learning Lab. I've heard so many great things about that course that I want to take it, even though I'm not even in the classroom anymore. But yeah, so when it
I
comes to
recommend it.
build or yeah, good. But when it comes to build or buy, and you see that that thing either doesn't exist or it's quite expensive for buying, whatever the case is, really reaching out to say what do other people have? And there's so many tools that are coming out open source now, or that people are willing to share.
And I think that feeds or can help feed back into the ROI conversations, right? And
Mhm.
question that you mentioned earlier. Um, so let's kind of think about putting a maybe putting a ribbon around this whole thing of tools and platforms that are AI enabled that are more point solutions. I think right now the current trend is to limit, monitor, detect, or block the use of AI in some shape or form. That seems to be what the market is at least what I'm seeing more focused on. But I think also there's a little bit bubbling up around using, for lack of better terminology, kind of naked AI in its truest form from the other platforms. So thinking about the whole space, what's your best guess, or what's your future look of where the intersection is between kind of policy driven use versus just dropping in a tool or a point solution in the higher ed space?
I'm really seeing things kind of across the board. So I do see some element of wanting to block or control or what have you. Uh, but I think I said at the beginning of this call, I'm seeing such a range, everything from that all the way to AI for everything and every new tool, we want to test it. Every issue we have, we want to solve it with some AI tool, and everything in between. And that in between is really important because it's the majority. So we don't we don't necessarily read about those in between cases in news articles or hear those folks as guests on podcasts because it's almost less, it's less clickbaity, right? So I really like to, I guess, platform this idea that most institutions, most institutional leaders, most stakeholders are in that in-between space. So I think you'll see lots of people moving forward on their AI journeys in this way that some tools look really cool and shiny and they want to just try them out because it's fun and why not? And at the same time, they'll have this positioning of here are some really sticky problems I've had in the past that I want to solve strategically with AI tools. And I don't think there's anything wrong with a mix of that. I think if you're on either end of the spectrum, it can be a bit challenging. I think if you're only trying to enjoy and investigate and play with the coolest, newest, shiniest things, you might miss a lot of really rich opportunity if you came at it from a strategic position. And I think that if you limit yourself to only coming at it from a strategic position and not allowing the space to just play with cool new things, you might miss out on some fringe cases or unexpected possibilities or opening your mind to completely new things. And so I don't know where institutions will land, but I hope that we'll see a bit of a mix of those two approaches.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, something a little more personal. What's the one tool or use case that most excites you, or and you think everyone should take a look at? Something you've
Yeah,
liked.
so I know the question is most exciting, but I might answer as the thing that I've found to be the one use case I'm talking about the most when it comes to my personal life.
Perfect.
Uh, and that is, I'm really concerned about generative AI tools used for fraud, for example, and for tricking people into thinking that people are other people. I think it's because my mother-in-law is 85 years old and she's always asking me, is this text message for real? Is this email for real? Getting certain phone calls that she's always trying to question. And I'm especially concerned about this because I'm on this podcast. I'm on my podcast, that Educause Shop Talk podcast. I'm speaking at conferences. My face is everywhere. And so I've often thought to myself, gosh, it wouldn't be that hard for somebody to FaceTime my mother-in-law as me, quite realistically. And so the use case that I'm excited to talk to people about is thinking about the people in your life that maybe aren't as tech savvy. And it doesn't have to be your 85-year-old mother-in-law. It could be anybody. It could be your brother who hates technology and refuses to learn about AI. It could be anybody. What I did with my mother-in-law was I used the ChatGPT app on my phone and I had her have a voice conversation with ChatGPT. And I wanted her to see how realistic this was, even without my being a digital twin of me or anything. I wanted her to experience firsthand how realistic this could be. So that does some things around the fraud element, but also I think just helping to open people's minds about what the world looks like right now and where things are going. Just having a conversation. There are a lot of people in our lives who may never interact with these tools on purpose
Right.
unless we help them do so.
Yeah, I
It's
know.
a
I, for one,
great
still have lots of
example.
friends that they don't want to have anything to do with AI. I'm not using that stuff. That's,
Yeah.
it's radioactive.
Yeah,
Um,
I particularly when people will say, like post on a social media platform. I don't use AI tools. AI tools are evil. And my first thing is, okay, this platform uses AI technologies and you need to know that. And
right.
this kind of comes back to what I said about my interactions with faculty, never telling people you have to teach with AI. I'm never going to tell my friends, my family members, you must use AI tools, but they live in this world. And so to me, I think I have an ethical responsibility to help them understand what that technology is and how they're interacting with it, but not on purpose.
I mean,
You make an
yeah, and I think that's really, really smart advice. And even, how do you know you don't like the taste of pineapple if you've never tasted it, right?
Yeah.
So you can even frame it in that kind of a real world experience. How are you going to know it's not valuable, or how are you going to know what the limitations or possibilities are if you've never experienced it? So that I think that's really smart advice. And I think that's actually kind of the perfect place to close. Um, this has been an amazing, amazing conversation, Janae. We really appreciate it. And we obviously thank the audience for tuning in. We appreciate that as well. So I will close this out. This has been the AI on the Quad podcast. And until next time.
Class dismissed.